Bye-bye. Welcome to the web. Do not hesitate to ask your questions during the presentation by registering them. In the space provided for this purpose, we wish you a happy webcast. Thank you. Thank you. It's all exciting. I have the impression that it's a big TV show. There is a quiz, maybe there are artist fires. Directly from the universe, I don't know. Anyway, thank you so much for being there. For this event, this discussion with experts at the Sustainable Mobility Agency, live from Montreal. Live from Montreal, but you'll see, we have a panel that travels across Canada. Even the United States, we have an international guest, so I think it's going to be very interesting. Hi, my name is Marc-André Carignan. I am an author and animator specialized in urban planning. Maybe it's been several times that you see me here at the Sustainable Mobility Agency. By applause, who is on his second or more panel discussion here. Oh, well, it's not that bad. And so, we have new faces. It's good, thanks for being there. Thank you very much at home as well. Or at work taking the time to connect for this big discussion on a topic. Current events, that of technology, mobility and of course, when we say technology, mobility, data collection. So, we're going to pay particular attention on that because yes, with our cell phones, with the sensors as well as cities, there was a lot of talk about smart cities a few years ago. Sounds like we're hearing a bit less talk. There, we went in. Artificial intelligence is like the hot term right now, but we still can. Capturing a lot of data, but capturing it is one thing, storing it is one thing. Using wisely is also another challenge. So that's a bit of all that we're going to discuss today. Then we'll see if artificial intelligence with our guests introduces itself. I feel like it's going to be a part of it at least a bit. In franglais today, so a game in French, but we have guests, as I was telling you. Who come one from Seattle in the United States and from Toronto as well. So we will have our one part in French, one part in English. We have simultaneous translation, if you ever want it. There were QR codes at the entrance. QR code 2, right here, on the edge of the room. So if you want to have access to simultaneous translation, well, you can do that. Who is director of the Sustainable Mobility Agency here in Montreal? Laura. Good morning and thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, members of the Board of Directors. From the agency, dear guests, we are very happy to welcome you to our first panel of the year of the agency. This panel will be devoted to everything related to data, such as, this is very important for us at the agency. We are very involved in this. Data allows us to improve our post-operations. Data allows us to improve. Mobility also allows us to achieve our mission, which is to facilitate shared streets and our vision of making the city accessible for all. We have a lot of diverse and varied projects that play on data. In previous years, last year for example, we set up place automated registration plan reading systems to find out. Go and collect data on the occupancy of the border and the public domain. Algorithms have been developed. Very powerful to analyze and process them. In parallel too, we have, this technology has also been used in a different way. Even more demanding, in fact, in terms of surveillance technology, so. Our automated course of enrollment reading. We have 2 vehicles that drive. Currently, then we will gradually serve the entire city of Montreal with. These technologies will also provide us with a lot of data that we will also be able to use in the future. A project that has also been pursued since the creation of an agency. It's the one in the border inventory, so it's our ability to know exactly in the documentary border streets, where are the various regulations placed, how they manage space, that's something really neat in detail. We got into this at the agency with a group project to have a complete hard-to-reach store all over the city of Montreal, which would make us the only city in North America to have that information. So we are also clearing land. New ways of collecting and processing data. These are great challenges, but we are confident that it will allow us to degrade great value. So technology helps us plan better. Planning public space will also help us provide information in the future. Provide information to citizens to help them in their choice of mobility, of course to cars. And on parking, but we think that we can also go a step further and have a direct influence. Mobility behaviors, so technology, data, two super important things. Important for innovation, to stimulate it. We also want to bet at the agency, then. We are very much in line with the City of Montreal on this subject, on transparency, on the availability of data. I was talking about inventory, for example. It is an incredible collective wealth that would be made available and freely available. Freely for all citizens, but all the data that we process at the agency belongs. The moment they are considered sufficiently reliable and anonymous, they are made available sufficiently. On various tools. Lots of data for organizations. In general, a lot of data, especially for the agency. We also want to get more in the future raises several questions. How do we already use the one? What do we have? Do we have to mark up future uses differently? What are the of an ethical game that will be linked to this data? We have a lot of data that could be personalized. But you depersonalize them to use them. But the more we have, the more we will have these depersonalities. Solve these challenges and never forget the technologies. It must be just the tool for the achievement of our mission and not the other way around. So we will have to. That it always remains in the service of the public interest. That is extremely important for us. So, on behalf of the entire team at the Montreal Sustainable Mobility Agency, I would like to welcome you. Thank you for coming. Thanks to all of our panelists who will bring us super interesting elements. To have a very good panel again today, then we will follow the discussions for a lot of years. Thank you and good panel. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Mr. Chevreau. Familiar, we also have a question period a bit more in the second half. So if you want to intervene, ask for additional information from our guests, you can do it directly. In the room, I will let you know when the time is right. Same thing also online, in the chat window. If you want to ask questions, you can do it remotely and we will be able, so I will receive them here on my iPad. We will therefore be able to fuel the conversation with you also remotely. Yes, we have a super nice panel, indeed. I am presenting them to you just now. I will invite you to go up one by one. And go and get settled. So I'm going in the order of the list I was provided with. So don't take it the wrong way. Benoit Balmana, who is the Managing Director of IVO, an NPO that supports cities in the deployment of innovative solutions. We are talking about small towns and an applause, Benoit. Elizabeth Poirier-Defoy, from Mobility Data, who is helping the industry also develop solutions with data tools, Deputy Managing Director. Good morning, applause. Yes, Faiz Patel. From the Toronto Parking Authority, which is a bit like the AMD here in Montreal. To the development of parking. Good morning. Marie-Catherine Snyder, the Seattle Department of. She's with us on the screen. Hi. She is a development strategist, and Nicholas Phelan of the Agency of Sustainable Mobility, Senior Director of Technology. Hello, Mr. Phelan. Good morning. Yes. Great. So, to start with, I think that I named your businesses. I quickly named your professional title, but I think it would be nice if we could get to know you more and what you actually do on a daily basis. With your fields of action. Let's take a turn. I start with you at the end. Excellent. Hi, thanks for the invitation. It is really a pleasure. I am Elizabeth Poirier-Defoy, the Deputy CEO of Mobility Data. Mobility Data is an organization. Canadian non-profit abuse program. We are located here in Montreal, but we have the pleasure of working on a international scale. We ensure the adoption and improvement of data standards in public transport. So to give you a very concrete example, if you see your bus route, your subway schedule, the price of a ticket, in your transport application, for example transit, which is from Montreal, but it's via the data standard that we manage. So we're doing that work on an international scale, so we ensure that the data standard is used both at Japan, Australia, and Mexico. So we make sure exactly also the quality of the data, because once the data is produced, it is important that it is of good quality that the traveler has the right information. Also on the availability of data through a directory, a catalog. So, these are all tools that we have put in place here in our organization. We also do this work for shared mobility, so think about car sharing. to Bixby. So it's a job we're doing in partnership with many at the governmental level, at the municipal level. Operators, transport agencies, but also mobility applications. There you go. So the cocktail of transport, does that go as far as, I don't know, bike sharing and those things? Absolutely. Even to. So really the rooster. Patel as a whole. Mr. Patel, for your part, can you explain a little bit? What you do and your actions, your everyday actions. Perfect. Thanks for having me today. My name is Fayez Patel, and I'm the Director of Parking and EV Development for the City of Toronto. The Toronto Parking Authority, also known as Green P Parking, oversees North America's largest parking operations. We have somewhere in the neighborhood about 60,000 parking stalls between our on-street business and our off-street business. What makes us unique is we also oversee the third largest bike share program in North America. So a lot of mobility. With respect to parking, bike share, and recently, we've grown to become Canada's largest municipally owned EV provider. My team is a relatively small team of individuals that we focus on looking at ways of how we can bring technology, data, and interconnectivity between different city agencies that are accustomed to provide a great customer experience for the residents of the City of Toronto and our visitors. Interesting. Thank you so much. Mary Catron on your side. Great, thanks. My name is Mary Catherine Snyder and I'm with the City of Seattle in our Department of Transportation, and welcome to my living room. And so the Seattle Department of Transportation and our group in the Curbside Management Team. We have a small group that does. We have about 30 people in the Curbside team overall, but our group focuses. On my team, we focus on planning, program development. Focus on urban logistics, neighborhood car planning. We have a small EV charging program that we're starting up. And other kinds of project review, curve priority. That kind of work, and I will apologize if you see sunshine flashing my face at some point today. It's quite sunny today in Seattle. But I shouldn't apologize for that, it's actually very funny. Yeah, well, thanks for being with us. I think it's quite early for you, so you have coffee, I guess, also. And your organizations. The Seattle Transport Department, is it in the city itself? Or it's like an Agence de Mobilité Durable, or like a non-profit, or? Oh, no, we're a city agency. City agency, alright, we're a city, you know, we're a transfer. So we kind of run the gamut of traditional public works, paving, and then capital projects, mostly. Our department is kind of known for building buildings. Building things, bike facilities, paving roads, maintaining the system. Nicholas, Laurent flew a little bit. The star, you missed it a bit, but I'll leave it to you. Nicholas, fill in. I am the Senior Director of Technology at the Sustainable Mobility Agency. Good morning, everything. Yes, in fact, everything that Laurent said was true. It's good to prove. Luckily, we are a paramunicipal, so we are an organization. We are not directly from the occupy everything that is parking, but not only that. We take care. Mainly from the border. We do the surveillance, we sell parking fees, permits, you know me for parking and meters, our mobile application. There are also other activities related to transport on demand. And then we do parking studies, we do analysis. So a lot of data, a lot of technology, and then all that in order to sharing the streets of Montreal. That's so well said, okay, well. Benoit, well, I said it in the introduction, so you work with, mostly, I don't know if that's the case 100%, but with smaller or medium-sized cities. So you're going to reach a slightly different audience which may also have different transport habits. Yes, exactly. So, Benoit Balmana, Director of State, which is an organization that supports the municipal sector in everything that is international deployment of new technologies. Indeed, we have a sustainable mobility component which is quite strong, even if we are doing projects in other themes. Then the advice. The observation we made and the reason for IVO is that indeed, in Quebec, there are a lot of small, Medium-sized municipalities. For the sake of statistics, I like to remind you that there are 1,100 cities in Quebec, and that there are only 10 that have more than 100,000 inhabitants. So you see that a lot of municipalities are. These are small municipalities where the issues are different from those in a metropolis. The resources are also different, and so if they are not accompanied support in the identification of new solutions, there is a risk of a lot of missed appointments between the municipal sector and innovation. What we try to do at Ivo. Let's go concrete. So now you've just introduced me a bit. A slightly more general picture of your organization, what you do on a daily basis. Let's go. More concrete technologies, projects you are currently working on that obviously highlight data. Our current topic in mobility. So, projects that you have either developed or technologies on which your organization is based or who is in development for good. Understand a little bit, well, how promising it is, until how useful it is, but above all how it is beneficial for cities and also for citizens. So I'll get you back to the right place. Okay, we're going back the other way. Listen, yes, in the municipal sector. It is certain that all decisions must be well reasoned, and it is certain that basing on reliable data to make the right decisions seems obvious, but it's not always. It's always easy in a small municipality to have all the data you can find. Maybe here in Montreal. So, we do a lot of projects, either data acquisition or in any case, to try to analyze and value data. Earlier we were talking about station issues. In small towns, there are also parking issues, probably a bit different from Montreal, but this is often a very sensitive and political subject because a lot of people complain that there is not enough parking, in principle, in cities, whereas when you do a thorough education, we realize that there are a lot of parking spaces. They are not all in front of the store. There are some, so try to document through data analysis processes, or image analysis or counting to provide reliable information to be able. Undoubtedly, is there an issue or not? Parking game, because parking is often very emotional. And when you are able to collect data 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to have a very accurate portrait of the situation, it's easier to argue or not. Is there a lack of parking spaces or not? This is one of the examples we looked at in a subject very close to the parking lot, but I could come back to other initiatives we are doing in mobility more wider, if you want. Yeah, well, that's interesting. And so, in the end, yes, this data can be used as an argument at the political level or at the level of organizations, but is it that this data is transferred in any way? I don't know how to direct traffic, for example, to parking spaces worth reading, stuff like that. In fact, what we realized is that when municipalities ask us, at the beginning, that was kind of the dream project. It was to assess a situation, put small signs to guide citizens to the right place, then finally when we do the analysis, and when we realize that there are no parking issues, in the end, it is perhaps less useful to go deploy signs to explain to people where to go, so we realized that through good data collection, we simplified the problems a lot. Project to deploy, because maybe there was no need to go into these project deployments. I am coming back to my idea that, based on good data, we will be able to take the good decisions and be able to argue them concretely. I take 2 seconds to explain. At the beginning, people often said that we counted, there was no parking problem. The merchant or the citizen said yes, but you did not come to count on Thursday at 2 p.m. There was a problem. Of course, when you do a manual count, there may be problems. Now, with the data, the technology, we have a 24/7 view. It's difficult to get pointed out a situation that you haven't monitored. By the way, Nicholas, when I am wrong, but you had also developed just this type at the agency. Type of technology where you could indicate in certain more specific sectors of city, the people who arrived, because it is often said that 1 out of 3 people who drive around the city and are looking for parking lots. You also had technologies that were a bit systematic, similar to try to guide people on the subject. The occupancy rate, at least, then it's interesting what Benoit says because, indeed, there are all sorts of technologies that are being developed, deploy that we use, but there is always a dichotomy between having the data at a specific time and perhaps over a larger territory, or have the data continuously, in real time and continuously over time, but this involves deploying equipment, installing a sensor. Who is there? Who is staying there? So we, at least in Montreal, there is a challenge to scale that up. There are a lot, We have over 17,000. 1,000 paid seats in the city center and in the central districts, but we also have, I think, the equivalent of 500,000 parking spaces. Unregulated or residential, it is impossible to instrument from A to Z. So, we are looking for the mix of technologies to be able to have data either or continue, and then extrapolate all that to, as Benoit said, be in. I would be curious, Mary Catherine, on your side in Seattle. How do you work it out in terms of technologies and, like I would say, the key technologies that are transforming the management of public space and public parking? Yeah, well, just two quick examples. One in our paid parking program. We have about 11,000 odd street parking spaces, and in 10 years, we have been setting and we've had paid parking since the 40s. But in the last 10 years, we have done a regular on-street parking study. And that has gotten more and more sophisticated in terms of the technology we have to collect data. We now have a model that uses our transaction data to provide. Basically tell us at any given time how full the parking system is in a different neighborhood, and we're using that data to set our parking rates 3 times a year. In fact, we're about to adjust our parking rates now. Actually, and so, we're able to adjust rates by the season and really show data to the business districts. They appreciate that we're not just setting rates and then walking away and 5 years later be like, maybe we should address some parking rates, and then we're using data from the neighborhood to adjust the parking rates in that neighborhood. We also have some parking sensors, or sensors in load zones in a neighborhood in downtown. And we're hoping to expand that program quite a bit. One thing with freight systems is that freight is very different behavior than street. Free parking. Bright has to happen. Like people have to deliver all the goods and services, otherwise the businesses can't operate. The packages, they have to get delivered, and so it's really fascinating. It's fascinating to see the patterns of freight delivery over the times of day, of times of the week, and try and figure out, well, where are loading zones necessary? Where should we put them? What hours of the day should we operate them? And, just one day of, year study is just really, we're realizing that has just hasn't anything to do with reality in terms of, it's helpful, but it's not, you're just getting one point in time. And so I think the real-time information, it's really we're just starting to get that information from our downtown study staff, with the help of some federal, UStat federal money. And it's just fascinating because so many things get delivered on any given day. Freight and urban logistics is only increasing. Well, we're, trying to build out a sustainable transportation system, so it's getting more and more constrained as well, so we're talking about the part. You were talking about the parking rates that are going to change next. But do you use the data that you have in the traffic do you have a dynamic parking rates? Well, so we set rates by neighborhood, and some business districts there are subzones. And then we set them by time of day. So we have a morning, afternoon, and evening rate. And then it's, 3 times a year. So it's very important. I like to call it performance-based and variable. And then people call it dynamic, but, it changes at the time. The rates that I was talking about, but I think it's back 10 to 15 years ago, it changed every 5 to 10 years, so. It's certainly dynamic now, The same in Toronto? We're not quite where Seattle is. We aspire to get to where Seattle is, and hopefully in the next year or so, probably 2 years, give or take. Toronto has been a little bit unique in how we've approached this. About 2 years ago, we started playing with the concept of really understanding what our infancy on street is in real time, and across the industry you'll see things like in-ground sensors, camera-based technology, vehicles that are driving around capturing in different times, and we just wanted to have a good understanding on what it actually means and what that data can actually help support in driving decisions, changing behavior, and ultimately, making the life of our customer a little bit easier on how they get from point A to point B. Last year we started toying with the idea of sensors, and on some of the busiest streets in all of Canada, in downtown Toronto, we deployed approximately 500 in-ground sensors, and we deployed another 500 in-ground sensors in some of our off-street service lots. And, Benoit and Nicholas spoke about this. Is that it's very interesting to see data come across in real time? What's the reliability of that data? How accurate is it? But ultimately, what does that data look like? And that information help drive with your end customer. Last year, we were successful in a small prototype, we were able to take the information from the in-ground sensors, put on our street, and we were able to put that on our Green P app. Our Green P app. Approximately 2.4 million customers that use our app every single day for parking. And we wanted that information to be in their hands in real time to say, if I'm going to go from my home to the hospital, traditionally a customer would or a person would say I'm going to drive to that location, drive around the block a couple of times and see where I find parking. We said if we had this information in real time and we can show our customers to a very highly level of accuracy and credibility that parking is available on the street or any of our off-sheet locations, that helps not just the customer from getting from point A to point B and a more stress-free time, but it also helps with congestion management in the city of Toronto. You guys probably read in the newspapers traffic is really bad in the city of Toronto. But it's all of these small things that layer on top of each other that ultimately make the customer's life a little bit easier, but also help support what we're trying to do from an environmental perspective. Marianne touched on something that was very interesting. The notion of leveraging historical data. If we'd processed in the neighborhood about 27 million transactions of parking last year, think about how much data that is and what that data actually tells us when people are parking, how long they're parking for, people that pay for parking and leave in maybe 30 minutes instead of the hour. All of these details we're now seeing from multiple sources, whether it's our transactional information that we see, whether it's actual ground sensors that we're looking at, whether it's cameras, and I think from Toronto's perspective, I don't think it's one or the other. I think it's a combination of trying to take pieces of very real accurate data and putting together a story that if I'm John and I want to go from point to point B, I can say I have certainty that there's going to be parking in that spot. So if I want to go to a Raptors game or to a Leafs game, when beat Montreal, we have that ability to make sure that people are finding that parking spot instead of thinking I'm scared of driving to Toronto or downtown Toronto because I don't know what's going to happen. So I think there's a combination of a couple of things that you got to put together. I don't think there's one solution that fits all. And it's always funny with Google Maps or Waze because you have the time to your destination, but once you're at the destination, you need to find parking, so you need to have 15 minutes but 100%. I would be curious on your side, are there precisely technologies or elements that you are, let's say one, that you are the most proud of, that you work on, that really benefits, ultimately benefiting cities and on the part of citizens? Absolutely. But in fact, it is good that I am the last. I think I'm going to push the slogan sharing the streets of Montreal. That's it. Takes place across all types of mobility and with the intersection between data of public transport and curbside, of parking, it can allow to make better decisions, decision-making at the city level. And in my opinion, one of the most powerful tools that can improve the fluidity of transport and also the operation of the traveler. So for us, that's something that's important. That there is what is called interoperability, so that the different data can talk to each other if we want, so we can do a better cross-analysis to ultimately have better decision-making. I'm rereading your questions a bit. Your testimonies and a bit of your experiences. Nicholas mentioned among the deployment obstacles, of course, the question of the size of the territory. And I imagine that it's a bit the reality. In the suburbs, sometimes that's it. In addition, there is less concentration. In the city, there is a certain form of concentration, but it's a very large territory anyway, if we just take downtown Montreal, and so that seems to be fairly common in the issues. Nicholas, I would be a bit curious to hear from you on this, and then of course, that he who says surface area also says the cost of deploying this type of technology. Indeed, There are solutions that would work well. There are sensors, there are cameras. We have vehicles equipped with camera kits. Plate reader. There is a package of solutions. Sure, a sensor in each seat. On the border, we would have all the data we want, but are we going to deploy any? It's money. There's an environmental cost too. The city is doing some work, so it's not necessarily realistic. What we think? Then foyas. What touched a little bit was using the right mix. We have payment details for paid seats. We have sensors in some places. Other places are cameras. There are even traffic cameras whose images can perhaps be revalued to count vehicles. Then the piece that was maybe missing or that will maybe help us in the future. The not-so-distant future is AI, to succeed in collecting, implementing. In relation to all this data, then extrapolate a data that we will be able to have for the whole city because it works in small areas. We did it in Montreal. Toronto did it. Other cities did it. If we take a small sector, it is. That brings it very high value. Now it's time to find out what technology. Not just in a city center, for example, because there are fairly dense neighborhoods. Here, in Montreal, we're taking the set in Toronto. Montreal, the same thing. Seattle too. So that's it. So investment too, because it's an issue. It is extremely expensive to buy, but in addition, there is maintenance to do. There is the interview. There are breakages. I imagine that too. It must be a fairly significant obstacle too. For all cities, we are all in trouble. We are all scraping money from the bottom of the drawer. Especially also, I imagine, smaller cities. Yes, but the question is still interesting. Comment because small towns are often for businesses. I imagine that there are some in the theater and on the screen. It doesn't always seem like a very attractive market. Because precisely, maybe the volume will be smaller than millions of sensors in a large municipality or a metropolis. On the other hand, it is interesting to go test. Because we need less infrastructure, we are able to have smaller territories. And so often, small municipalities are used to precisely test new technologies. To already demonstrate at lower cost, at lower risk, perhaps before. Extrapolate them to bigger cities, so it's a small side of the small. Of municipality that we always forget, but there is still agility also due to the fact that the teams are smaller, we are closer to the directions, the territory is smaller, the costs can be reduced. Smaller also for experiments, pilot projects, then apprenticeships more. Can later be used for larger deployments. So if there are companies in the room that are developing technology, in fact, we can serve a bit of a test bench on a small scale and then afterwards to transfer, as we are doing today, knowledge and learning so that it can be deployed at lower cost, at lower risk too, because, yes, the cost, but above all the risk also of innovation when we mean is it. We're going to deploy 1 million sensors in the city. Yes, it's expensive, but will it work? It'll give the results we expect and therefore the validation on a small scale, the experimentation, then. On that with the Lorraine team, they are very strong on this idea of experimentation as well. Before deploying, because it makes it possible, of course, to reduce the risk above all. That's the risk, in fact. That is the key word I remember. Do you feel that? As a big risk when we use technologies in general because I have the my imprint. Maybe I'm wrong. It can become a burden for a city, a financial burden. Yes, it can work, but even if it works and you have data, you have to maintain. You have to clean. You have to up-to-date the technologies, the sensors, everything. Can it become a burden for a city, Mary Catherine? Yeah, I mean that's definitely something we have to think about. Actually, and I mean that's not something that I mean, there are definitely sensor projects that may still be installed, for instance in the city of Seattle, that are now dormant that I won't name. You know, that, so I think, yeah, so, you know, I think that's a risk. I think, you know, I think when you're on the cutting edge / bleeding edge, it's fun and exciting, but you also have to keep in mind that there are operations and maintenance. To kind of understand what, you know, what is the next step? How does this maintain? How does this scale? So that's what you know when people come to us and say, hey, we have the sensor thing, we have the big project that we can put in this one area of your city. I'm like, that's great, I have 20 of those areas like that. How does your thing meet 20 of them, right? And that's often the frame of mind that I take, which may mean that we don't do that kind of project because, I don't wanna. We're pretty, conservative in that mindset then, which means that we might not try things out that a lot of other cities in the U.S. actually have been or sit, Montreal and Toronto have been trying out, but, so but it gives us a chance to learn from others and so, there's kind of a risk and reward that way. So you let FIAS do the test and then you adopt it. Right. Yeah, thank you. Thank you all very much. People like our friends, we let our friends try things and then we learn from them and they learn that we have that's really interesting because also you were talking about this. Yeah, you have you have a lot of promises in technologies and you're talking about risk. And I'm sure in Toronto or any cities you have a lot of people data that are trying to sell different technologies. So there's the risk, Because I think that some you have to test and you probably have immaturity in terms of development on certain technologies, right? She raised a great point in the sense that technology exists, it's been around 5-10 years. Cameras are, they're advancing but Nicholas mentioned something in terms of. So we have on street about 21,800 parking stalls. For me to contemplate installing 21,800 sensors or cameras in the city of Toronto is not possible. We learned from a prototype of 500 on-street sensors that coordinating with construction activity that's taking place at any given time, coordinating with weather increments, winter snow, where we have streetcar tracks where streetcars pass by and create vibrations. There are so many things that we've learned in our small prototype that, So I think we have ground truth at a very high level of accuracy plus minus 3-4% that we're comfortable with. But I think to your point, one of the things that, we have to remain focused on is how do you scale in a way where you can ultimately get very good reliable information that serves your end customer or your end need. Because, we can talk about cameras, we can talk about in-ground sensors, we can talk about data, we can talk about all three of them, but what's the use case that you're really? And if you look at it through that lens, sure, you can, take a chance on a third-party vendor. You can do a prototype with someone and say, hey, we want to try to solve this. Can you help work with us on it? Which we've done. And some of it has proven actually to be very valuable. Where we are now in Toronto, similar to what Mary Ann just said, that I have this. And I want to get to a point where I can, give the customer information on scale, but how do we get there in a reliable way? The accuracy of that information, the reliability of that information, whether it's cars with cameras driving around and capturing information, or cameras on poles or ground sensors, all of that is trying to do the same thing. But I think the problem that all of us probably face is how do you get to a point where this is a combination of a multiple number of data sources that provides very reliable information to help solve the end customer's needs. We haven't figured that out. Someone has. We're all ears. Really interesting. You want to react? Yes, in fact, on the side of public transport, one of the solutions we found to reduce costs, among other things, it is the standardization of data, to have a community that agrees with how to represent information, but this means that the solution is shared, we represent as many codes of use as possible. For example, we recently had a vote on an extension to represent categories of travelers. So now it's possible to say, well, I'm 20 years old, I am a full-time student, so I have access to student rates. There is now a way to present this in a mobility application. When we did the research work to understand how representing it, we took into account what is happening all over the world. We made a proposal that is simplified, which is unified, and we respond to as many use cases as possible. So, on the sensor side, for example, a way to reduce the cost of scale would be to say we use a standard that is to be able to standardize the way in which data is created, is then used. And for our part, one of the things we have, a program that we are now on. Manager, It's called the Mobility Data Interoperability Principles. It is like a guide that says what do we expect to have a data that is and interoperable. We have co-authors who created this program. We have co-signers, including several soldier salesmen. IT solutions that agree to say that we agree. That we use the same data title, the same standard title, and we stand out with the quality of our service, the quality of our software, and not on the data we will use. We agree that there is an economy of scale to be achieved with standardized data. Are there any issues? I am asking the question perhaps in general terms. General information on data storage. I am making a comparison with police officers. Here in Montreal, there was all this debate with the video images that can be recorded. One of the big debates was not so much whether we should have it or not as how we are going to store this data. Now, in addition, it's a video image, so it's very heavy. So, there was the whole question of storing that, the servers it took, the people that it took to transfer the data. Then after that, the obviously ethical question, what do we do with the data? How do we do it? The guards, so the whole ethical question. Is it a mobility issue or more or less? I can answer, in any case, for some projects we did where, yes, that. At the beginning, several municipalities told us that we did not necessarily want to deploy cameras in the city for these issues, but today, technologies have still evolved where we can treat the home directly into the camera, take the data that interests us, then instead of sending a image, just send the data, so that simplifies everything. All these issues then in addition so well the police may not be the same because maybe we need to review video sequences, but when we talk about plates or counting images or behavior detection, we can just extract the data we need. And then the image disappeared right away, so these issues technologies have evolved to address these issues. Because yes, there are some cities that say, I don't want to have a camera because I don't want citizens to think they're being watched all day long, so technologies are aware of the challenges, needs, and then businesses. Entrepreneurs are very creative, and then often they try to adapt as well and then respond well to these issues. This is an example that I can give that answers that question. The citizen question is very interesting, because yes, we ultimately want to help the citizen to be. We said it sometimes, to go from point A to point B, then to move more efficiently, but there is also the big brother side that worries a lot of people because now, more and more, we're being spied on all the time. A lot of companies collect our data. Selling, well, there are all sorts of realities. Precisely. I have the impression that there is a work also of mediation, perhaps a bit to do between the development of technologies. Strategy to help the citizen versus the ethical side, everything that surrounds the technology. Nicholas, indeed, there is a dimension, a social acceptability to be sought, then. We are public organizations, so for me, it is all the more important to handle data responsibly, to respect privacy. Personal information, that's right. When you put on a camera, there's always the potential to having images can be sensitive. We have Law 25 in Quebec which came to model all the regulations on the processing of this data. We have obligations too. It is important of everything we deploy to make sure that we manage it in a way are very, very responsible. Then the first thing to do in everything. In fact, it's going to sound crazy, given the theme of the panel, but that's not collecting the data. If you don't need it, there's no point in having it. Data comes with all sorts of challenges and constraints, unnecessary costs. Clouds to store that, you can lose control quickly. There is an environmental cost. If it's personal data, you have to be careful with that. So, step number 1, if you don't need it, is not to collect it or to delete it when it is no longer recovered. If required, there are all sorts of mitigation measures that can also be taken. Compress it, do summaries, keep only blur faces in photos, depersonalize data. Besides, it's a lot of work anyway. Yes, or treat just what is called edge computing, process that locally in the camera and then receive just one. Who no longer has processed data, who no longer has personal data, who is much smaller. So it's huge. A lot of parameters, but I think what's important to remember is to do so in an ethical, responsible manner and with respect for people's lives. But it requires more effort. Fayez, I saw you reacting. When Nicola was talking, I don't know if you were reacting to the environmental cost or... No, we faced a very similar situation in Toronto, where the city of Toronto looks at people That you drive through red lights, speeding cameras, stuff of that nature, we're not involved in that space. We've been looking at how camera-based systems are so advanced now that they can pick up so much information, and Nicholas raised a very good point that you have to ask yourself, what are you really going to do with that information? It's great that you can get all the data, but what's the actual use case for that data, and how does that actually help solve any problems? More times than not, we err on the side of caution in Toronto where we take personal data very, very seriously. Whether it's payment data, whether it's images that we're capturing based on street that are impacting our parking stalls or someone's license plate in our off-street surface lot. All of these data points can tie back to an individual. And, I think the argument that we're still trying to figure out is, it's great that technology can capture all this data, but how are we making sure that we're only collecting what we need to solve an actual use case, and how we then protecting the data? Because, obviously in Canada, we have very stringent privacy data security regulations. And we want to adhere to that. So it was more just to that point. Mary Catron, you want to react? Yeah, well, and I think, so the Sydney-Seattle essay. A strong privacy program. We were one of the first cities with the surveillance ordinances. It's pretty strict, and I would gather similar to what? Maybe similar to the Toronto-Montreal examples. The other side of this kind of technology and advanced technology is having the staff in-house and the systems in-house that have the capability, the technical analytical capability in the systems to be able to run them. And I think one of the challenges that, the local governments, and I think, in our situation in other cities in the U.S. that folks that I've talked to is just building up that service and that team, and that is also challenging. It's just like legacy on the curb space side, or just building up that kind of, technical awareness, kind of getting rid of legacy systems and just being able to manage, this new tech in-house and not entirely rely on, what the third-party vendor is telling you, not relying on, and not giving away what is actually city owners. City-owned data, like, this is city right-of-way, and so this is city-owned. City signage, city data, and we don't want to sign it away to a third party or a large third party, in some cases. And so, those are also challenges, and that outside of the privacy kind of surveillance thing. And I also just say that, and also it always comes down to an art group of like, and our mission is about safety and climate. And so how are we meeting all of those goals with what we're trying to do? And as long as we're doing that, then if we can explain that, then I think we're putting the camera off in the right way. I'll get back to you, Elizabeth, in a moment. I just want to mention that I'm going to move on to government questions. If you are listening to us remotely, feel free to send us your questions virtually. We will be able to answer it in a few moments. Elizabeth, I'm coming back to you. I saw your head hushed during all the conversations. I think you have a lot to say. In fact, I am still thinking about doing the parallel with what we have done in terms of public transport or shared mobility. I think that one of the advantages of the GTFS and GBFS data format is that it is a governance model, which is very open, but always has the government in mind. Protection of the individual. So, for example, in shared mobility, we have the idea of someone who unlocks a scooter in front of a store to get to his house. Obviously, you don't want to be able to understand that the person is part of the business. To go to his house and make connections because the data could be accessible since it is open. So, we got around that by doing a scooter identification rotation. So it's now impossible to link a user with technology. Scooter. So, there are ways to do it, even in open data, to protect the user. Therefore, every time we work in this kind of project, our first consideration is always, do we protect the user first? Then, we will work with the operator and with the governance of the standard. But that's interesting. Maybe I can start the general question, because data collection, well, you're doing it for you, for your work, your technologies and others, but is precisely talking about open data. So open data, do you use it in cities, this open data, to use, creative genius, so the people who, ex-developers who could help you create other applications in parallel, others. Technology, we know that it is increasingly open data, the cities. Try to release data from time to time. Is it something that Seattle, Montreal? Yes, I can answer for Montreal. Obviously, the agency, we have certain data that are byproducts of our activities that we produce and then, that we open in open data. Moreover, we launch next week, a mobility data portal that will be that's going to be available on our website, and that's going to be a place to find not only our data that's generally generated by the agency, but we will also look for other data, GTFS or data, who come from the city, Bixby. Our objective is to, there's a lot of use in this data. There's a lot of use in our data. Where do we really look for value is when we put that into relationship and then we are able to analyze, to facilitate. At the crossroads of all of this. So, yeah, there's a lot of value, there's a lot of stuff. On the other hand, it's often a bit arid, it's hard to. Or maybe it requires being a developer. So at the agency, we also gave ourselves the mission to facilitate access to information on parking, the mobility of mobility in that way. In Toronto, did I use open data? Are you using creative citizens to help you? So we're not there yet, we're on the cusp of it now. The last 2 years we've been really on getting reliable data that we're helping to. We'll obviously improve our operation first and foremost, look at ways on how we can help our customers. And now we're at a point where we're saying, well, we have a lot of very valuable data from very sources that we think can play a role in helping people in their day-to-day lives, and how we now share that publicly is something that I think probably by the end of 2020 or early 2026, we're probably going to be making much more strides in. So, a little bit early for us, but we're getting there. Cool. What about Seattle? Yeah, so we've had an open data program probably for about 15 years, and then Seattle was fortunate in that we've had a long-time asset management program, so we know where all of our parking signs are, our traffic signs. We have a large-scale SMS management program, and it's all on our open data program. I would actually say that for our real interest and my focus when I push our own open data, the GIS science and all of the parking transactions that are up there is that, it's for research. We get, lot of researchers and students or professors. But also companies. So what is? If that, and I'll just shout out Google Maps or Apple Maps. What if they could take, and it's in a standard, there's a curb data standard that Open Mobility Foundation has. If we're able to get all of our curb data in the curb data standard, and other cities are working on that as well, and we have it all available, well, then, could these mapping services take that data, make our data available, and then people, instead of, driving to their destination and then looking for parking, they actually know where off-street parking might be available or the freight delivery. They know where the load zones are, and they might even get availability information if there's sensor data. So I think that's, to me, it's a research component for, science, and then, but also more of the third-party logistics dispatch process. And on the transportation, how do we reduce traffic congestion? And, those are bigger, kind of better, I would say, reasons for the city to really promote and push this data. It's also just a great way to serve public disclosure. For this information, it's great, it's online already, so if people are wondering why they should do it, that's one of the reasons. I was talking about using people's creative energy to precisely help with the work. I'm going to do it here too. I'm going to use creative energy. I like that. Turn to assistance because we have people who are often in the field. Or a strong interest in, oh no, we don't want to. We wanted to vote. Ah, okay, okay. Well, great. Yes, so I am turning to you. Don't hesitate. Maybe just, what organization do you name? Then I still have lots of questions. I can. Then, if you have a specific question for a specific speaker or all that. Me, I can go on and on. Sir here in the back. Well, great. Thanks. Good morning. Good morning. Great. It works. Well, thank you all so much. It is so appreciated to have you here. Benjamin from the Sustainable Mobility Agency. I have a quick question. Especially in terms of the speed of arrival of the various technologies. Especially to artificial intelligence. Technology is coming from all sides super quickly. How organizations and cities can adapt to technologies, especially up to date and without becoming backward after only 2 years that a technology is already a bit too old. I would like to hear you a bit about this through the city. Interesting. Yes, well, that's right. We currently have a lot of requests for projects that would use artificial intelligence. We really need to differentiate between those that the municipalities are going to deploy themselves, and then those where they are going to support, acquire solutions that artificial intelligence uses because the level of complexity, of resources and expertise is not at all the same, for sure. In the small municipalities we work with, we tend to look for new applications. Who will integrate this artificial intelligence? I can give an example related to mobility. In regions, there is often much less data. Mobility, because there are no buses, there are no bikes, there are no scooters. Maybe sometimes it's a bit more complicated to make decisions about land use planning, bike paths and others. Then, we see all the use of what we call GPS tracks coming in. Massive data on the movement of people that we acquire precisely through applications. Like weather, media or other, which everyone is happy to have, by the way. People can unsubscribe if they don't want to, but in principle, people contribute. The acquisition of this data. So now, that's a lot of travel data that we can precisely with artificial intelligence, massive data management, really extracting the most used routes, origins, destinations. If they are blurred, there, or others, the most used to, precisely, get the municipality to say. We realize that it would be worth putting a bike path in such a place. This or that business or maybe even simulate the arrival of a major industrialist in the city that will generate maybe 2 to 3,000 additional trips. How? It will impact the city, so it is not the municipality that will develop it itself, but it will. On the other hand, take advantage of all this learning to, once again, make the right decisions. The right choices because they are going to be argued. We will have the right data to make the right decision. The question is also interesting about models of artificial intelligence, because we are seeing it right now. There is a big war between the different. Or I think it's control with Microsoft, I control. In short, there are a lot of models that are developing, a lot of companies that are working on this. Who will have the top, which will have the more efficient model, DeepSeek also on the chain. Anyway, I can't wait to see where it goes. I have a question from Samuel. The question is in English, so I'll do it like this. My question is about intermunicipality mobility data sharing. What will be the incentives for municipalities to share its mobility data with other municipalities and under which conditions? The question is intermunicipal because it is nevertheless interesting also between regions. And sometimes there are people who work in the village next door, in this, in that. So there's a lot of, the intermunicipality is quite important. So what would the unification be? You could translate that into winning conditions or so on. People or municipalities to share their data to perhaps create more mobility. Regional. Oh, Nicholas, yes, already leaving, I am sure that Elizabeth. To have something to say, but there are very few blockers. We are not businesses. Private in competition. Cities are not competitors. And then we said, already a lot of exchanges with, in any case, we, Montreal, are doing exchanges. With a lot of cities in Canada, Toronto for example, Seattle as well. In the United States to try to learn from the good lessons learned and to change. Data. All that. Our data is by definition in the public sector quite a bit open data. So there are very few blockers leaving afterwards. Maybe it's for incentives. I don't know, maybe I can leave my colleagues. Incentives or Fayez? Yeah, I think it's a great question, Nicholas. Touched on it, the beauty of operating within a municipal environment where we're looking at multimodal ways of transportation, parking, bike share, EV charging. We're not competing with other municipalities. I'm not looking at Nicholas and saying, what's your top line revenue at the end of the year? You know, how much money are you guys making? We're looking at it as, you know, Nicholas and the team in Montreal, they probably learned very valuable lessons on what they've already done. Same with Seattle, same with Vancouver, same with Calgary, same with folks in the United States. In Toronto, we have a very firm belief that we're not experts in the parking lot industry, but we can leverage people that have a great understanding of and a great historical knowledge of what they've been doing that we can leverage information from and leverage actual use cases from. We don't see it in any which way as a. We actually are open to sharing our lessons and, you know, providing insight that someone else can leverage on there. And I think that's the really cool part of being able to operate within a municipal framework where it's not a competition. It actually is helping drive improvements for our customers, whether it's in Toronto, Montreal, Seattle, or anywhere. I'm going to leave you with the last word, Elizabeth, because the time is up. As Benoit told you, brought you the loss, I have no choice. I'm going to do that quickly. I think that, in principle, there are no barriers. I think that in reality, there is no barriers because cities seem to me to be more. When I talk to cities, they are protective of their data. It is something that is precious, a piece of data. We worked hard to create it. Why is it that I should? Collaborative work between different cities is not always easy. Less resources are limited. That said, in principle, everyone agrees on sharing our data. After that, there are also technological challenges. For example, is as standardized as everything. Everything. Very recent that we are able to represent in the GTFS. The CrossFit transfer, which we call. So it's possible now to say, okay, I'm leaving from this region of Toronto where I'm going to the extreme. From the city, I just passed through 3 different transport agencies. But I can go there with one transport ticket. Remember that the RTM has, I think, 400% type of transport. I don't want to say a false figure, but it's a huge challenge. To represent this in standardized data, how do the different agencies talk to each other? So, the challenge is there, but the will is very present, and that will be the solution to succeed. It will be this that will allow us to reach a common solution. There you go. The final word. I love that. That is very good. I would like to continue. You can say, I will have a reference that Marie-Catherine and Fez will not understand. I was going to say, I'm going to do my Genmark parent, we're defending. No, I think we'll stop here, but very interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Benoit Balmana, Elizabeth Poirier-Defoy, Faye Patel, Marie-Catherine Snyder, and Nicholas Fillon. Thank you so much for your expertise. Good round of applause. Thank you also for taking the time to come to us. Thanks for meeting us. Thanks also to the house if you took the time to connect. Telecommuting, office maybe also. It was a pleasure. I invite you to obviously follow the social networks of the Sustainable Mobility Agency for the next activities of this type, animation of panel and others. Well, there you go. So social networks. My name is Marc-André Carignan and I wish you an excellent experience. Have a nice day. Thanks.